I saw a man dressed in white, with light radiating from him. He looked at me and called my name, in a voice I had never heard before, but could never forget. I had never believed in dreams. To me, it was just a product of a tired mind, the remnants of a long day filled with thoughts. But that night, the night I still remember every detail of, even after so many years, everything changed. It wasn't just because of the dream, it was because something inside me lit up from that moment on. I remember lying curled up on a thin mattress, surrounded by piles of bills, rejected job applications, and a silent phone. I was exhausted from struggling, from living in a state of nameless despair. It had been a long time since I had prayed, thought about God, or even believed in His existence. If He was real, why was He silent? If He loved me, why had He abandoned me? And then I fell asleep, not in peace, but in exhaustion. In my dream, I stood in the middle of a wide field with no houses or people around me. Only the wind blew and a faint golden light spread everywhere. I turned around in circles, confused and disoriented. Suddenly, someone approached from afar, dressed in a long white robe, his face indistinct, but the light from him shone all around. I stepped back, partly out of fear, partly because I didn't understand what was happening. Then he looked at me. He did not speak immediately, just looked. His eyes were not judgmental or cold. They were filled with love and understanding. My heart suddenly trembled. And then he called my name, my child, not loudly, not harshly, just a gentle call, but it echoed deeply like thunder. The name that seemed meaningless in this world was spoken in such a sacred way. In that moment, I felt that I was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten, no longer a failure. I collapsed, unable to speak, my eyes filled with tears. He did not blame me for my doubts, did not condemn me for straying so far. He just stood there, present, as if He had always been there, waiting for me to stop, look up, and listen. I woke up, not because of the alarm clock, but because something inside me had changed. That night, I was no longer the same person. I didn't understand everything. I didn't have all the answers. But I knew one thing. I had been called, and I couldn't go back to the way I was before. Others might say it was just a beautiful dream, but for me, it was my first encounter between me and the one who had always watched over me, waited for me, and called me by name. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding. The dream was unlike any other dream. It left me with a strange sense of peace and an indescribable longing. I opened my eyes and looked around the dark room in confusion. There was no more bright light, no more field stretching out, and no more gentle voice. But my heart was still beating, as if it had just touched something too sacred to describe. I sat up, my hands clasped over my chest. Not because I was in pain, but because my chest felt warm. Not from my body, but from within. There was a strange movement, both gentle and profound, stirring my soul. I wasn't afraid, even though everything was beyond my understanding. On the contrary, I felt a sense of peace, a peace I had never experienced before, despite having pursued so many things in my life. I thought about that face, the light, the white robe, the non-judgmental eyes. But what I cannot forget is that voice. He called my name, not a generic word for all of humanity, but my name. Exactly, clearly, as if He knew me better than I knew myself. I never thought God could be so close. In my previous thoughts, if there was a God, He was far away, somewhere in the sky, high and cold. But this dream made me unable to hold on to that thought anymore. A loving being calling my name in a dream, it was no longer a matter of religion, but a matter of the heart. I lay down again, closed my eyes, and tried to return to the dream, but I couldn't. Everything seemed to fade away, leaving only an echo, like a song that had ended, but whose echoes lingered in my soul. Strangely, I was not disappointed. Instead, a hunger grows inside me. Not hunger for food, but hunger for something sacred, more real, more solid than anything I have ever pursued. The next morning, I don't turn on my phone as usual. I don't check my messages, emails, or social media. I sit quietly in my small room and whisper, "Are you real? Do you really know my name? If so, please tell me more. I want to meet you again." I didn't think I was praying. I was simply saying what I felt in my heart. No formula, no need for doctrine. And the strange thing was, as soon as I said it, a warm feeling spread through me, as if someone had heard me and was smiling. Since that night, I haven't been the same. No one saw any outward change. I was still unemployed, still lonely, still facing the same old challenges. But one thing had changed. I no longer wanted to go back to my old way of life. I longed for something more real. I wanted to know the one who had called my name. I wanted to understand why he had appeared. And above all, I wanted to know if I could hear his voice again. And so my journey began, not with a single step, but with a heart that had awakened, in a night that seemed meaningless, but became the first night of a new life. Before that, I believed in God only vaguely, distantly. I lived according to my own will, according to reason, and cared little about spiritual life. I grew up in a family that was not unfamiliar with religion, but God, to me, was just a vague concept. I had heard his name, attended Christmas services, and seen crosses, but all of that was like a page in a history book rather than a real connection. I knew about God, but I didn't know him. My youth passed with confidence in my abilities and reason. I believed in myself, in my plans, in my degrees, in my relationships. I did not deny the existence of a supreme being, but I did not think it had anything to do with my daily life. Religion, if it existed, was for the weak or the lost. As for me, I wanted to decide my own destiny. I used to think that doing good was enough. I didn't hurt anyone. I lived independently. I was moral. That was enough. Why believe in a God that I couldn't see or touch, and who seemed to have no part in reality? But it was precisely that distance that left me without a foothold when everything fell apart, when my career dreams failed, when the person I loved left me, when the long nights were empty and I faced a harsh truth. Everything I had clung to couldn't save me. I began to ask myself, if God is real, where is he in all of this? Or did he never exist? I never expected that at that moment, when I was full of doubt and felt so distant. He would call my name in a dream. I didn't understand why. I wasn't someone who eagerly sought him. I didn't read the Bible. I didn't go to church. I didn't pray every day. Yet he came, not to condemn me, but to look at me with gentle eyes. This confused me deeply. I had always thought that God was only close to the righteous, those who kept the commandments, read the Bible, fasted and prayed. But I, a person who lived by reason, who had once laughed at people who talked about faith, was meeting him on a quiet night, not because I deserved it, but because he loved me. I began to recall many times in my life when I had seen his shadow, but did not recognize it. Once I almost had an accident, but was unharmed. Once I was filled with disappointment, but was unexpectedly called by someone asking how I was. Once, standing at a crossroads in my life, I chose the right path even though I did not understand why. Now I see clearly he was there, not noisy, not coercive, but always watching over me. I realized that I was not unfamiliar with God because he did not know me. I was unfamiliar with God because I refused to open my heart. And now I want to change that. I don't want to just know about God. I want to know him truly, not with my mind, but with my heart. I don't want to stand on the sidelines of faith anymore. I want to step inside, even if I am still confused, even if I still have doubts. But I know that call is real, and I will follow it. The following week, I dreamed of him again. It was the same light, the same gentle voice, but this time, he said, "You don't have much time left." I still remember that night clearly. I went to sleep with so many unanswered questions. The previous dream had shaken me. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, to believe it was just my imagination, but another part of me kept rising, longing to see those eyes again, to hear that voice. And then, unexpectedly, the dream returned. This time, everything was familiar, yet different. It was the same scene, a space filled with light. It was him, the man in white, with a kind face and eyes that seemed to see into my soul. He didn't need to introduce himself. I knew it was him, God. But this time, He didn't just call my name. He looked straight at me and said, his voice deep and gentle, "You don't have much time left." I froze. His words were not threatening. They were not thunder or punishment, but they rang like an alarm bell. I felt the seriousness and the love in every syllable. Not much time left. For what? I wondered about it for days afterward. Was I going to die? Was something terrible about to happen? Or was it simply a warning that I had procrastinated long enough? I began to think differently. If the first dream was a gentle nudge, this one was an urgent invitation. It was as if he was reaching out his hand, and I had two choices: take it or let it slip away. I recalled all the times in my life when I had procrastinated. When someone shared about God, I silently moved on. When a friend invited me to a group, I politely declined. When my heart stirred at a hymn, I told myself, it's just a feeling. When I saw a Bible in someone's home, I briefly wanted to read it, but then I didn't. I kept thinking I had time, that someday when I was free, when I was more settled, when I was less busy with the realities of life, I would learn about God. But maybe that someday will never come, unless I choose to take a step forward right now. Those words, "I don't have much time left," have stayed with me. They've made me see life differently. The things I once thought were important, my job, my status, social media, recognition, have suddenly become meaningless. There is one thing I want to know for sure. Who is God, and what does He want from me? Perhaps the time He speaks of is not soon, but rather an opportunity that is closing. A door of grace, if not walked through, will close silently. Like the dawn, not loud, but those who do not rise in time will miss its beauty entirely. I don't want to miss it anymore. I have lived too long in indifference and self-satisfied reason, in a good but soulless life. Now I see clearly, only God is the light my soul longs for. The second dream is not simply a repetition. It is the final reminder, the bell of love. He did not come to threaten, but to awaken. I decided I would not wait any longer. I would begin to seek Him, not out of fear, but because I felt this was my time. I went online, looked up the Bible, watched videos of testimonies. I began to ask people I knew who were believers. A question arose in my heart. Is God really calling me? After the second dream, I could no longer rest. I couldn't go back to my normal life. I couldn't just work, eat, surf the internet, and sleep as if nothing had happened, because something had been awakened in me. A nameless longing, a gentle yet powerful urge to seek God. I didn't know where to start. I had never read the Bible, never prayed in the true sense of the word. In my mind, the image of God was very vague, perhaps the image of Jesus crucified that I had seen in church as a child, or a few words about faith that I had heard someone mention in passing. But this time, I didn't want to hear it in passing. I wanted to know the truth. I opened YouTube and typed, "Testimonies of meeting God, dreams of meeting God, what is the Bible?" A whole new world opened up. I watched people who had once been far from God, some addicted to drugs, some who had once opposed faith, some who had once been as desperate as I was, share that they had met Him, and I saw them cry. I cried too. I began to ask questions. Is this real? Is God calling me? Was that dream just a coincidence? If God truly exists, what should I do next? I remembered an old friend who once said he was a Christian. At the time, I didn't pay much attention, but now I looked up his number and sent him a simple message. "Are you free? I want to ask you about God." A few minutes later, he called back. His voice was calm and warm. He didn't ask me what had happened. He just said, "I know that if you called me about this, then God must be doing something in your heart." I burst into tears. He shared simply that faith doesn't begin with understanding, but with seeking. And God, the creator of me, doesn't hide Himself from those who seek Him with a sincere heart. I no longer felt like a crazy, lost, or weak person. I felt called by name. That night, I downloaded the Bible app onto my phone for the first time. I opened the Gospel of John, as my friend had suggested. The black words on the white background seemed to come alive in my heart. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. I didn't understand everything, but I knew one thing. I had begun a journey not to seek knowledge or religion, but to seek him, the one I had dreamed of, the one who had called my name. I began to pray, not long, not fluent, just a few whispered words in the dead of night. Lord, if you are real, please let me know. I am looking for you. And something strange began to happen. I felt at peace. Not all my questions were answered. Not all my doubts disappeared, but I felt as if someone was walking with me, as if an invisible hand was lifting my heart, little by little. I was no longer searching out of curiosity. I was searching because I had been touched, because deep down I believed, even if only a little, that the call was real. And if it was real, my life would never be the same again. My work encountered setbacks, my health declined, and my relationships fractured. I felt as if everything was being dismantled, forcing me to look up. It seemed that dreams did not come just to stir my heart, but to awaken me. After my first prayers, after reading the Bible, I began to feel lighter, more hopeful. But then, contrary to my expectations, life did not become smoother. It began to become chaotic. The job I had been committed to for many years, where I thought I was safe, suddenly underwent a major change. The company was restructured. My department was cut. I was not fired immediately, but I was transferred to a completely unfamiliar position. The pressure mounted. I felt like a spare part, no longer valuable. At the same time, my health began to decline. At first, it was just fatigue and insomnia. Then came persistent headaches and aches and pains. I went to see a doctor. Nothing specific came up, but my body was telling me, stop, something is wrong. And then, like the last straw, a very close relationship of mine also began to crack. That person, who had always been by my side, gradually grew distant. Conversations became tense. The silences grew longer, and the glances grew colder. One day that person said, I don't know who you are anymore. You've changed, you're colder, more distant. I don't blame them, because I didn't understand myself at that time either. Half of me still wanted to hold on to everything old, my job, my reputation, my stability. But the other half, the part that had begun to hear God's voice, knew that I couldn't go back to the way things were. I felt like a house being torn down. The bricks of my past, my job, my health, my relationships were being removed. Not with a crash, not with a bang, but slowly, bit by bit, as if someone were doing it on purpose. At first I was confused. I asked, Lord, if you are real, why are you letting me lose everything? But then a Bible verse I had once read flashed through my mind. I am tearing down to rebuild. Jeremiah 1:10. I began to realize God wasn't tearing me down to punish me, but to free me from the things I was clinging to, the things that couldn't save me. I used to think I would come to God after everything was stable, but He called me when everything was beginning to crumble, so I would know that He is the only foundation that won't shake. I began to pray more, not to get everything back the way it was, but to see what He was doing, to stand firm in the storm. I still have moments of exhaustion and discouragement, but for the first time in my life, I began to understand. Everything that is falling apart is not to end me. It is to begin me. A new beginning that is no longer based on my own confidence or on things that are easily lost, but based on the one I saw in my dream, the one who knows my name and is preparing the way for me to truly meet Him. I walked into the church trembling slightly. I wasn't used to that atmosphere, but when I heard the worship songs, my heart softened, as if I had just come home. I had never been someone who liked to gather in large groups, let alone step foot in a church, a place I always thought was only for people holier than me. I used to think, if I go there, even God will be surprised. But after some dreams and changes in my life, something urged me to try, to go and see. A friend from a small prayer group once invited me to come along. At the time, I politely declined, but today, for some reason, I called them back and said, this week, if it's okay, I want to try going to church. On the Sunday morning, I stood before the simple iron gate of a small church in the middle of the street. There was no dome, no towering bell tower, no luxurious leather chairs like I had imagined. But there was something warm about it. The sound of people greeting each other echoed from inside, along with sincere smiles. I felt a little nervous as I stepped inside. My eyes quickly scanned the room. Everyone was dressed simply, and everyone seemed very real. No one was particularly special. No one looked at me like a stranger. A few people nodded in greeting, and an elderly woman smiled and said, "Hello, is this your first time here?" I nodded, feeling shy, but my heart felt light. When the service began, I didn't know how to sing or the words, so I just sat quietly. But then the song began. He knows my name. He understands my every thought. I was surprised. Wasn't that what I had dreamed of? The one who called my name, now mentioned in a song? My heart tightened. I bowed my head and tears began to fall, silently, unseen by anyone. But for me, it was the first time I cried because I was moved, because I knew I was loved, not for my achievements or morality, but for who I was. I didn't understand the entire sermon that day, but I remember one sentence from the pastor. God doesn't wait for you to be perfect to love you. He loves you, to lead you on a journey of healing. I sat there speechless. Those words seemed to be written just for me. I, broken, struggling, and doubtful, was being called, not to perform acts of morality, but to begin a new journey, a journey back home. As I left, I didn't say much. I just bowed my head to everyone. But when I stepped out of the church, I looked up at the sky. The sky that day wasn't particularly blue, but to me it was as if a door had opened. I knew I didn't understand everything yet. I didn't fully believe. I didn't know what would happen. But one thing I knew for sure, I had taken the first step into the right place, and the voice from my dream, it was no longer a dream. It had begun to become reality. I met a pastor and told him about my dreams. He looked at me and said, "God is calling you home. He wants you to know him not through religion, but through a relationship." After the first meeting at the church, I kept wondering, was that dream, that face shining in the halo, really God? Or was it just a strange dream? I was still hesitant, even though my heart had begun to soften. A sister in the church saw me sitting alone in the backyard after the meeting and came over and asked gently, "Are you okay? Is this your first time here?" I nodded. Then, without knowing why, I began to tell her, little by little, about what I had seen in my dream, about the voice calling my name, about the light that was not blinding but warm, about the feeling of peace that enveloped me. I had never told anyone about these things, fearing they would think I was delusional. But today I spoke as if my heart had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She listened quietly, then said gently, "Would you like to meet the pastor? I'm sure he can help you understand this better." I hesitated, but then nodded. The following week, after the group meeting, I was introduced to an elderly man with a simple appearance and kind eyes. He was the pastor of the church. I repeated my story. This time I told it more clearly, as if I myself wanted to understand. When I paused, he smiled, not a pitying smile, but a smile as if he had heard this many times before. He said, "You know, throughout history, God has often used dreams to call people. He called Samuel by name when he was just a child. He appeared to Joseph in a dream. And sometimes, for people who don't know him, dreams are a way for him to get their attention." I sat there silently. "God is calling you," he continued, looking deeply into my eyes. "Not to a religion, not to a long list of things you have to do, but to begin a relationship between father and child." I had never thought of it that way. I had always thought of faith as a set of rules, a church with rules, a thick book. But now, I was being invited into a relationship? "So what do I do?" I asked. "Just open your heart and respond to the call. You don't need to understand everything to begin. Just say, 'Lord, if you are truly calling me, I am ready.'" A warm breath spread through me. It wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional, but I knew something had begun. It wasn't a religious experience. It was a response from this small person to the one who had been persistently calling me. The dream was no longer vague. It had become a call, and now I was learning to respond. I no longer reasoned. I prayed like a lost child who had been found. Lord, if you are calling me, I will answer. I used to be a person who lived by reason. I believed in logic, analysis, and verification. Prayer for me before was a ritualistic act, sometimes empty. I used to think that if God really existed, he probably wouldn't care about someone as insignificant as me. But that night, after talking with the pastor, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The dream was no longer vague. The strange peace in my heart was spreading. I knew God was calling, and I couldn't remain silent. I turned off my phone. I turned off the lights. The room was plunged into darkness. There was no sound except for my heart beating loudly in my chest. I walked over to the bed, and then, something I had never done seriously before, I knelt down. At first, I didn't know what to say. All the years of reasoning, all the sharp arguments I had used to reject faith, they were all silent now. Instead, I felt like a little child, lost for so long, now seeing the light of a house. I opened my mouth, but no words came out, only broken whispers. Lord, and if you are really calling me, if that voice in my dream was yours, then here I am. I choked up. Tears welled up in my eyes without me noticing. Perhaps it was because I was exhausted. Perhaps it was because I had never dared to be honest with myself. But this time, I didn't try to appear strong anymore. I can't argue anymore, Lord. I don't want to argue anymore. I just want to know you. I just want to meet you for real. Please show me who you are. If you really exist. There was no light from the sky. There was no loud voice. But at that moment, a strange feeling, gentle yet profound, filled my heart. It wasn't a fleeting emotion. It was a presence. It was as if someone was in that room, invisible but undeniable. I felt so small, but I felt loved unconditionally. I no longer felt ashamed of my years of doubt. I no longer felt useless for having rejected him. I just felt found. And in my sobs, I cried out, like a child running home after a long rain. I'm sorry, Lord. Please forgive me. Please let me start over. This time, not alone, with you by my side. I don't remember how long I knelt there, but when I stood up, my heart felt light as if it had never carried a burden. I no longer asked, "Are you real?" Because now I knew. You are real, and you know my name. It wasn't just a prayer. It was an answer. It was a response. Lord, here I am. From that moment on, everything began to change. Not because of my circumstances, but because my heart belonged to a new Lord. I didn't see miracles outside of me, but inside I felt cleansed. Something melted within me. I began to cry, not because of pain, but because I was loved. I used to think that God must be a powerful being who does supernatural things. If he really existed, he would surely appear in a blaze of light with a majestic voice or a miraculous sign. But then I realized the most miraculous thing is not the external spectacle, but the silent transformation within a soul. After that evening of prayer, nothing extraordinary happened in the days that followed. I didn't suddenly get a new job, win the lottery, or experience a miraculous healing, but something in me had changed. It was hard to describe, but it was real. I began to feel lighter. The dark thoughts that had once clung to me, as if someone were slowly untangling them, began to fade. I no longer blamed myself constantly. I no longer looked in the mirror and hated the person staring back. For the first time in years, I could breathe, not just with my lungs, but with my heart. One afternoon, I sat alone in my room. There was no music, no one teaching, just me in the silence. Suddenly, like a wave rising from deep within, I felt something very powerful. Love, not human love, fleeting, selfish, or conditional, but love, pure love. I burst into tears, not because I was in pain, not because I was weak, but because for the first time, I felt completely loved, even though I didn't deserve it. I cried like a child, and in those tears, I realized something I had never understood before. God didn't need me to be perfect to love me. He loved me before I even knew him. I felt like he was touching the deepest parts of my heart, the places I had hidden, the places I was afraid to touch, the places filled with shame and hurt. But he didn't come to condemn me, he came to heal me. I remembered a Bible verse that I had skimmed over before. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I have continued my faithfulness to you. Now I understand. That love is what drew me, from my dreams, from my confusion, from my pride, back to the one who was always waiting for me to return. No one saw the change in me at that moment, but I knew, from that day on, I was no longer the person I had been. He had touched my heart, and I will never forget that feeling. I began to remember old hurts, things I thought I had forgotten. God didn't overlook them. He touched them and healed them. I used to think that faith was about the present and the future, believing in God, going to church, living a good life, waiting for the day I would go to heaven. But I never imagined that in order to heal me, God would take me back to the past, to the place where my wounds had never fully healed, even though I had tried so hard to forget. Memories I thought were buried deep in my subconscious began to surface, not like a flood sweeping me away, but like gentle waves allowed to wash over me under the light of truth and love. I remember my childhood with the harsh words, the comparisons, the contempt. I remember feeling lonely in my own family. I remember the ridicule I received when I failed, the mistakes that were mercilessly exposed. But now I don't have to do that alone. I began talking to God as a father. I told him things I had never dared to say to anyone else. I spoke about my fears, my anger, and my shame. And he didn't judge me. He listened. Once while praying, I saw an image in my mind of Jesus sitting next to me, saying nothing, just placing his hand on my shoulder as I trembled, remembering the past. I don't know if it was a dream or reality, but the feeling was so real that I couldn't doubt it. He didn't force me to be strong. He let me cry. He didn't tell me to get over it, but said, I was there when you were hurting, and I am still here to heal you. I began to write down those memories as a way of facing them. And as I wrote, I prayed. I was no longer afraid of them, because I knew I was no longer alone. I also began to forgive, not in my own strength, but by his grace. Forgive those who hurt me. Forgive myself. Forgive the injustices of life. With each act of forgiveness, a chain fell away. I cannot change the past, but I am no longer a victim of it. Thanks to God, I am free. Once again, I understand more clearly why Jesus said, Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Matthew 5:4. I thought I needed to forget the past in order to move forward, but God chose to touch that very past, to heal, to liberate, to transform me into something new. And that is more miraculous than any miracle I have ever asked for. I still face difficulties, but my heart is no longer in turmoil. I am learning to live each day with God instead of fighting on my own. I used to think that once I met God, all my problems would disappear, that faith would be my ticket out of trouble. But I was wrong. After praying, crying, being touched and healed, I still had to face life. I still had an unstable job, bills to pay, and loved ones who didn't understand why I had changed. The cracks in my relationships didn't heal instantly, and old wounds didn't disappear after a single prayer. I realized God didn't promise to take away all my burdens, but he promised to carry them with me. And that's what made me start living differently. Before, I lived with a self-reliant mindset, thinking that if I was good enough and worked hard enough, I could control everything. But now I no longer rely on my own strength. I'm learning to let go, little by little. It's not surrender, but trust. Every morning I pray before doing anything. Every night I give up what happened during the day, whether good or bad. I no longer try to find solutions in desperation, but I'm learning to listen to the quiet, sometimes very small promptings of the Holy Spirit. Some days all I can say is, Lord, I am weak today. Please go with me. And he still goes, without demanding that I be stronger than I am. I also began to notice changes within myself. I am less quick to anger. I am more patient with others. I am grateful for even the little things. I am no longer afraid of the future. Challenges remain, but I am no longer the same person. like Job in the Bible, who lost everything but in the end said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," is Job 42:5. It's the same with me. Before I knew about God through books and other people's words, but now I know Him through my own painful journey. And it was during those imperfect days that I began to experience something greater. It's not that I have great faith, it's that I have a great one to put my faith in. I shared my dream with my loved ones. Some laughed, some were curious. But I wasn't afraid, because I knew the dream wasn't just my imagination. Something strange happened when I told others about the dream. The dream of meeting a being full of light, who called me by name and left me with a peace beyond understanding. Their reactions varied. Some smiled faintly. "It's just a dream. You're probably just stressed. Be careful not to get caught up in spiritual nonsense." Some were even blunt. "Are you starting to get superstitious?" I don't blame them. If I hadn't experienced it myself, I probably would have reacted the same way. I used to be a rational person who thought faith was weak, but now, having been touched by a love beyond understanding, I cannot remain silent. I also met people who listened attentively. Some of my friends were moved to tears when I told them. They didn't know what to say, but their eyes said it all. They longed for the same thing to happen to them. I began to realize that every time I shared my story, I wasn't just telling a story, I was giving testimony. Testimony that God is real, that He is still calling each and every person, each and every heart, without exception. I share not to be noticed, but to glorify the one who called me out of the darkness. I share with reverence because I know I am unworthy, but He chose me, patiently waiting for me to respond to His call. I also realize that my story is no longer just mine. It is a testimony to a real love, a love strong enough to break down hardness, to heal old wounds, to pull me out of the confusion of a life without purpose. And something miraculous happened. The more I shared, the more I believed. The more I share, the more I'm reminded that God is faithful. The more I share, the more I long to live a life that pleases Him. That dream changed me, and now I share it not because I am special, but because I believe God is calling others in many ways, sometimes through my own story. I realized that God did not call me through a dream, but through every day of my life, through strangers who helped me, through the Bible, through the silence in my heart. At first, I thought the dream was a special phenomenon, a strange thing that only happened once. But then after I began to pray, read the Bible and slow down, I began to see clearly. God was still calling me every day. There was no longer a blinding light, no echoing voices in my sleep, but gentle whispers in my soul. When I read a Bible verse that seemed to open up by chance, and it touched exactly what I was facing, I knew He was speaking. When a stranger smiled, helped, or said the right words at the moment I was desperate, I knew He was acting. When I pray and cannot find the words, but my heart is filled with an inexplicable peace, I know He is there. I am beginning to understand that God did not come to give me a memorable experience, but He wants a continuous, daily relationship. The dream was the beginning, but the rest of the story is the steps I take with Him. I also realized that there were times when I didn't feel anything. No dreams, no emotions, no strange signs. Just a normal day. But even in that normality, God was present. I remember times when I wanted to give up because I no longer felt God's presence as I had before. And then, a Bible verse seemed to be sent at just the right moment. For we walk by faith, not by sight. God is not an experience. He is a living being. He doesn't just call me in dreams. He calls me through reality, through people, through situations, through the Bible, through silence. There were times when I sinned, was weak, and thought He would abandon me. But then, once again, I heard His voice, not in my ears, but in my heart. I have not forgotten you. I am still calling you. And I believe, if you are reading this today, if you are longing for something more than what this world can offer, then perhaps He is calling you too. Not just once, but every day. The dream no longer repeats itself because I no longer have to search in my dreams. I am living in the reality of God's love, and I know that I have been found. Many months have passed since that last dream. At times I worry, has God stopped appearing to me? But then I realize I no longer need that dream, for God is no longer just a figure in my nighttime dreams, but He has become present in my daily life. I no longer seek light in the darkness, for I am living in that light. I no longer ask, is God real? Because now I talk to Him every morning. I no longer need strange signs, because His love has become more real than anything else. Dreams are the beginning, the alarm clock for a sleeping soul. But once awake, I cannot return to the darkness. The first dream I saw, the light, the voice calling my name, is still in my heart. But I know it is no longer an experience that needs to be repeated, because what I once dreamed of, I am now living in. I have come home. I don't have all the answers. Life still has its ups and downs. But I know I am no longer lost. I no longer need to chase after something vague, because I am loved, held by the hand, and guided every day by the one who called me in that dream. The dream did not just lead me to faith. It opened up a journey of living in relationship with God. That dream became an invitation home, and I accepted. Perhaps you have thought that God only speaks to special people, those who are righteous or worthy. I used to think that too. Until one night in a dream, He called my name. Not loudly, not angrily, just a light in a gentle voice that I couldn't turn away from. I didn't understand everything. I was skeptical, but I began to search. And it was on that journey that I realized He didn't just call me once. He had been calling me for a long time, but I hadn't been listening. He called me not to follow a religion. He called me to return to the love I was created for. He called me not to be perfect, but to be in Him and He in me. I no longer need recurring dreams, because now I am living in a real relationship with God. If you are weary, if you have heard a quiet voice within you, if you have seen a light in the darkness, please do not ignore it, because it may be God calling your name. And you know what? He is still calling, not just in dreams, but in every breath, every tear, every silent question in your heart. I heard His voice, and I answered. What about you? Thank you for following this journey of faith. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Perhaps someone needs to be reminded that they are not forgotten and that they are still being called by name. See you on the next journey, where God is still working, still loving, and still calling. Thank you for watching the video to the end. If you feel something in your heart, it may not just be an emotion, it may be a calling. Leave a comment if you would like to be prayed for, share your dreams, or simply be heard. We in our community will walk alongside you. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss real testimonies from real people who have encountered God in the midst of crisis, pain, and dreams. Share this video with a friend. It might just be what they need. You are not alone. There is someone calling your name, and perhaps this video is the answer you've been waiting for.